Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our afternoon session on day 2 on Digilabs20 here in Lübeck. Fast, convenient and easy to understand. Private citizens and also companies would use online service provided by the public administration more often if they can easily access them, either from the mobile, from desktop computer. The Online Access Act requires the federal, state and also the local governments to provide the services also in digital form via their own portals by the end of 2022. A total of 575 services are to be provided online. The Online Access Act implementation catalog provides or broke these services down into 14 categories. In so-called digital labs, which were founded by the Federal Ministry of the Interior, Building and Community, they would like to achieve this goal. How they do it and the best practice approach will now be presented by Max Osterheld from the Federal Ministry of Interior, Building and Community. Welcome, Max.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I know that in the schedule it said that Björn Bünsel would be here. Sadly, he cannot be here today because of other pressing obligations. He's my boss, actually, so I'm happy to cover for him, and I think I can give you some very interesting information about our DigiLabs as well. So I'm a policy officer at the Ministry of the Interior of Germany, and I know that in the last 2 days you have heard a lot about DigiLabs and how they are applied all across Europe. So I'm very excited to tell you about how we handle things here in Germany. I have to admit that over the past 2 years I've become quite a big fan of those labs, and I'm very much looking forward to telling you what we've been doing. Before I go into the best practice examples of how we do DigiLabs in Germany, I would like to give you a brief introduction into the general context in which our DigiLabs are placed, so to say, so the framework for the public sector digitization in Germany. I don't know how this works. Could you please move to the next slide? That would be great. Thank you very much. So the legal framework for digitization of the public sector in Germany is the so-called Online Access Act, or OAA. It's actually not the first initiative for the digitization of public sector services, but it is special insofar as for the first time in the history of German public sector digitization, we have a clear legal mandate that states that in the next 5 years, which actually started in 2017, so up until the end of 2022, all of Germany's public services have to be electronically accessible. That means there has to be a digital service. We didn't want to stop there as a country just to make services that exist electronically available or digitally available. Another important principle that is mentioned here is that online should be the preferred channel for accessing services, and that wherever possible, services should be implemented as once-only services. Also, which is not mentioned here on the slides, but which is very important to stress, is that digital services are supposed to be user-centric. That means the idea is that we will only have achieved the goal of the OAA if we create services that users actually want to use in their everyday lives. So if we could move to the next slide. Actually, the OAA and the efforts to implement the law are a pretty huge collaboration and coordination project. Before I get into the detail of the coordination structure that we've put in place to implement the law, maybe a few notes on what it actually means to digitize all services in Germany. So in the beginning, because the law just states that all services have to be digital, we basically had to figure out how many services there are. And it's actually quite astonishing how many different services there are. It's really quite a diverse landscape of services that we have in the country. We have found out that there are around 575 services, give or take, that need to be digitized on the OAA. And the specific specialty, let's say, about the German system being a federal system is that not all of the services are provided at one level of government, let alone at the federal level. As a matter of fact, very few services are provided at the central government level. Most services are actually provided by either the federal states that make up Germany or by the municipalities. And that means, of course, that you have to involve these stakeholders if you want to digitize all public services in Germany. Just to give you an idea of what that means, just look at the right-hand side of this slide. We have 16 independent or mostly independent federal states in Germany who all have their say in matters of digitalization. We have more than 14 ministries at the federal level, including the Chancellery, that are involved in policy making to a greater or lesser degree. That means they basically write the laws and interpret the laws that govern how public services are administered. And we have more than 10,000 municipalities in the country who are basically the street level of service delivery. Also, being a federal country, we have a lot of different fora where coordination takes place regarding policy matters that touch upon digitization. For instance, the IT Planning Council, which is the coordinating forum for everything IT between the states, as an additional challenge. Because our federal states are mostly independent, most of them have their own public IT service providers, which means there's a fragmented landscape that you have to take into account here as well. So if we go to the next slide, what we did after we identified those 575 services was that we clustered them further. But again, we did so from a user's perspective. That means, for instance, all services related to education were put in the thematic field education. Everything to do with health was put in the cluster health, and so on and so forth. But then the question, of course, arises is how do you actually digitize these services? And we came up with the idea that there should be a division of labor in the digitization of these services, because it simply makes no sense for each municipality and each state to start from scratch with every service and develop it over and over again. Think about that figure again. We have more than 10,000 municipalities. If all of them develop services on their own, that's a huge drain on resources, and it takes a lot of time. So what we did was we put together tandems for each of those 14 thematic fields, comprised of one federal ministry that is involved in the policy making for services in a thematic field, and one state that is, so to say, the single point of contact at the state level for all these services. Sometimes there would be more states, as you can see here in a thematic field, that contribute to one or more of the services in a thematic field. But mostly we had a tandem comprised of one federal ministry and one state. And these, what happens in these thematic fields is that the tandems look at what services have been clustered in these thematic fields, and they then come up with a plan to digitize these services and to actually steer the implementation of digitization. So that's the basic setup that we're looking at here. So if we go to the next slide, please. What's usually then happens in each thematic field is that you look at all those services and first of all, try and prioritize which services should be digitized first. And for that, we used different criteria. For instance, we look at what service is actually in high demand, so which one is more frequently used than others. We looked at the potential of digitization, meaning how much time and money can you save citizens, businesses, and the public administration. And we also looked at what kind of political or social objectives are linked to the delivery of a certain service to help prioritization here. Also, of course, we took into account legal requirements such as the SDG regulation or other considerations. But these are basically the most important criteria that we used here. Examples of these services you can see on the right-hand side, like high priority services, are the application for a driver's license, or the application for unemployment benefits or child benefits, for instance. If we could go to the next slide, please. So after having identified which services are of high priority, we then set about digitizing them using Digilabs. Basically, Digilabs, as I'm sure is the case for most other countries here, are based on design thinking methodology. So the idea is to develop a user-centric service in a short period of time that can then quickly be implemented in an agile fashion. And that is exactly what we have been doing here. So, and before I go into the details, let me just stress how un-German it is to work like this, and how at the same time working like this has conveyed a great sense of buy-in to stakeholders, and how everybody who has been going through these labs has really enjoyed doing so. So what happened in these labs? Usually we gather together a diverse stakeholder group comprised of policymakers from the federal level, street level bureaucrats from the state or municipal level, users, of course, and design experts and IT service providers who would eventually implement the service. Then we would usually set about starting with a thorough analysis of the status quo around a certain service and how it is being delivered in the real world, in order to identify pain points from the administrations, but also especially from the user's perspective. Then we would develop a target vision for an ideal process from that. And then we start developing prototypes. First, very simple prototypes for a service, basically on a paper basis, and then more advanced prototypes that actually visualize how a service should ideally look like. And this we would always iterate. All these prototypes would be quickly iterated with users in order to find a design that everybody finds appealing and ripe for implementation. And then we usually set about implementing a very basic minimum viable product version of these prototypes in a certain state. I'll get into the details in a second, and then build the service from there in terms of functionality, and also in terms of expanding the service to other states and municipalities. Right, so if we could go to the next slide. Here's an example of how this looks like in practice. So we usually start out with a paper prototype, as I've mentioned, where you really just draw how a service should ideally look like in terms of like how should every screen look like of the service. Then we would develop a so-called click dummy, like a visualization of the website. And then we have on the right-hand side the final service. So here, this is actually the example of the housing allowance, where we started out with a paper prototype and ended up with an actual service that has been online, I think since the beginning of the year. And that is actually much more user-friendly in terms of procedure compared to how difficult it was previously to apply for that service in the offline world. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Then, of course, the question is, after you have a DigiLab and after you've designed a service, how do you actually implement that? Well, this is where the one-for-all principle comes in, and the idea that for the implementation of the OAA, we would like to have a division of labor wherever that's possible. That means specifically that once a service has been developed as a concept, we usually try to get at least one state to implement it and implement it centrally so that other states can connect to it and have their citizens be able to access a particular service as well. And the idea here is to have a cost-effective and quick nationwide rollout of a service. And this is also where the public IT service providers come into play that I've mentioned earlier. So the idea here is that, again, not every state has to implement every service, but that one state offers the software for the application for some service as a service to other states. That's the basic idea. And that also means that the service is centrally developed for further use and with additional functionalities as we go along. The other states don't get these services for free, but they share in the cost of running the service and developing service proportionately according to usage, for example. If we could go to the next slide, please. So now on to some actual practice examples that we have implemented as part of implementing the OAA. First one has the title BAföG, which is basically a public scheme whereby students can apply for loans from the government in order to finance their studies. So the idea is that you apply for money, you get a regular monthly payment during your studies, and after you're done with your studies, you repay the loan, usually with very little or I think no interest. It's basically one of the most relevant services for young people. As you can see here on the slide, there are more than 500,000 applications every year. And it's actually a pretty difficult thing to do if you do this offline, because there are lots of forms you have to fill out. Not all of the forms apply to you. You have to provide lots of different proofs regarding, for instance, the income situation of your parents. So it's a complex service with a lot of potential for digitization from a user's perspective. We conducted a lab here, also starting from a paper prototype that you see here, and we built a one-for-all service that actually went live, I think, about 2 weeks ago, which is very exciting. Could you please go to the next slide? Again, as I've just said, this service was developed in a lab headed by the state of Saxony-Anhalt and the Federal Ministry for Education and Research. And the service is to be rolled out across the country next year. But 2 weeks ago, when the service was launched, there were already 5 states that joined in providing the service, and so far we have gotten pretty good feedback for that, as you can see on the next slide. So after just 4 days, we had more than 1,350 applications that have been submitted through the service, and more than 6,500 applications have been started, which means that people started filling out the forms and then saved their progress for later completion of the forms. And this is not a bad sign. As I said, it's not such an easy service to use. So you basically need lots of information. That's why usually people take turns filling out the forms. Oh, I just heard a voice. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
You can go ahead.
Okay, never mind. So after go live, we got lots of positive feedback for it because users are really happy about how the service works and that it's much easier compared to the previous procedures. We got good feedback on social media. There was a joint press conference of all the stakeholders involved, which was noted in the press as well. And we're really happy how this has been going along. Also, it's a huge success that really all states want to use this service. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. Another example that is probably more timely for a German DigiLab is the COVID-19 DigiLab. To state it in a very short way, this was about providing a service that would make it possible for businesses to reclaim expenses for wages they paid during the pandemic for people who were either quarantined or had to take care of their children at home because schools or kindergartens are closed. So basically it's a recompensation scheme for businesses. And the problem here is that, well, there was a law on the books before the pandemic that said that you can reclaim expenses for employees that are quarantined. But in all of 2019, there were like 200 cases nationwide. So it's a service that was practically never used in real life. And then there was the pandemic. And the government introduced an amendment to the existing law and the I think law against the for the protection against infections that said that you could reclaim expenses for wage payments for people that have to take care of their children at home. And all of a sudden, there was a potential number of 1.3 million people who might claim the service. And it was clear that state governments who were in charge of dispersing these payments were not in any way able to create the infrastructure needed to handle this amount of claims. And there was no way this was going to happen. So what happened was Ministry of Interior teamed up with a number of states to hold a DigiLab remote. We weren't able to physically meet, so we did all of this remotely. And we hammered out a concept and put up a service within just 36 days. And that was a very intense period of time, let me tell you. It was not that easy because in the beginning of the year, video conferencing didn't work as well as it is now. But together with the states, we succeeded in putting together a service that is now being widely used and that actually helps dealing at least with some of the fallout of the pandemic, which is something that shows that this is a concept, like DigiLabs are a concept that works in order to create good services in a short period of time. Of course, we put a lot of resources into this as well, but with any other method, it wouldn't have worked as well. Of that, we're absolutely sure. And I think with that, I'm already at the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for your attention. And I think we have a few minutes left for Q&A.
Yes. Thank you, Max, for the insights of the German DigiLabs. We have one question out of the chat. Andrea asked, how did you map all the services? Did you use some automated processes or did you manual mapping?
Actually, that's a great question. We did a combination of all of that. So there was a lot of manual research involved, but we also automated this process. For instance, we scraped existing websites of state and municipal governments to get an idea of what kind of services there are, and we also undertook an iterative process with experts also from the different thematic fields in order to make sure that we hadn't missed anything, or to make sure that what data we gathered was actually correct.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps can you share some lessons learned which failure other labs or other initiatives should not do, especially for other countries? What have you learned during this period?
I think what is very important is to make visible what you do. What we've learned is that when you conduct a lab, everybody who is involved will absolutely love the result, because you create something very cool, very interesting in a short period of time, but you have to make it visible to the management level, not only that you had a good time working on this project, but that you actually created a project that other people want to use and that is worth pursuing in terms of implementation. So I guess top-level commitment is absolutely instrumental in actually making sure that the nice ideas that you developed actually end up being implemented.
Thank you. There's one additional question from the chat. What is the timing for completion of automation for priority procedures?
So you're probably talking about the once-only based services, right?
Yeah.
Like where you don't have to, yeah. So basically the Online Access Act doesn't give us a time frame for like completely automated services. It states in the first place that the priority is basically to make a service digitally available in the first place. But of course, we are following the requirements by the SDG regulation for the prioritized services, and in certain other services, we have more ambitious timelines, or where the SDG regulation does not apply. We're striving to make once only available sooner. But that also is tied in closely with the modernization program for German public databases, which is a huge effort and will take some time.
Thank you, Max. Thank you very much to be here, even though virtual. Perhaps the next time we can meet directly in person. The next session will be start in 1 or 2 minutes. Welcome back to the last keynote for today. How important artificial intelligence is for the public administration and how it can help us. We already had yesterday evening in the speech of Minister President, State Government of Schleswig-Holstein, Daniel Günther. Now in the World Bank session, I would like to welcome Bernhard GRŠIČ, State Secretary, Central State Office for the Development and Digital Society of Croatia. Elisabetta CAPANELLI, Country Manager for Croatia, Slovenia, Europe and Central Asia from the World Bank. And Kaspar, Head of the Unit Growth and Business Environment, Directorate-General for Structural Reform Support from the European Commission. You will provide us an overview of emerging technology, AI mapping of administrative procedures for the business environment. Welcome, Bernard. Perhaps you might start?
Thank you. Poštovane dame i gospodo, iznimna mi je čast što vam se mogu obratiti u ime Središnjeg državnog ureda za razvoj digitalnog društva Republike Hrvatske na ovoj konferenciji DigiLabs. Svjedoci smo vremena u kojem se na praktičnom primjeru krize uzrokovane pojavom koronavirusa pokazala nužnost i neizbježnost korištenja digitalnih tehnologija. Primjena digitalnih tehnologija se nametnula...
Sorry,
yes.
The translator must enable the microphone so that we can listen to them.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Now, yes.
Okay.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, I guess it would be great if you repeat and start from the beginning. So, Werner, again.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Poštovane dame i gospodo.
Ladies and gentlemen,
mi je čast što vam se mogu obratiti.
It is a great honor for me to address on behalf of the Central State Office for the Development of Digital Society Croatia at Digilabs20. We are witnessing times in which the practical example of the corona crisis has shown how necessary and inevitable digital technologies are. Digital technologies are needed for an efficient functioning of society at all levels, especially for a continued and smooth operation of business processes. In the world of social distancing measures, self-isolation, work from home, and everyday need for up-to-date information from reliable sources, digitalization is the link that connects us all.
Next slide, please. Vlada Republike Hrvatske.
Digital transformation is a strategic goal of the Croatian government, and it consists of three pillars: digitalization of the industry, digital service delivery to citizens, and digital government. Our main goal is to digitize all segments of society by engaging all stakeholders in digitalization processes, namely citizens, the economy, and public administration. The focus is on activities pertaining to digitalization of public content, higher transparency of public administration, better information of civil servants, and coordination of all activities. Today, Croatia is conducting over 180 projects related to digitalization, in which the principal bodies are those from the public sector. The projects are used to finance not only infrastructure, but also strengthening of human capacities, upgrade of digital services for citizens, and the Shared Services Center project. The Shared Services Center will consolidate in one location, a cloud, databases of all public administration bodies and improve service and data delivery to citizens at all levels. Through this center, the government will obtain a faster access to the latest technologies, which are the basis to provide a higher number of digital public administration services as efficient and as fast as possible. We at the Office for the Development of Digital Society are conducting on a continuous basis digitalization of all public administration processes, further development of e-services, and linking of all state administration bodies. It is with the digitalization of internal processes that we aim to increase the efficiency of public administration bodies, eliminate administrative barriers, reduce the cost of operation, and in the end, increase citizens' trust in public authorities.
Next slide, please.
The e-citizen system has been operational since 2014 and is continuously upgraded with new services, better quality, and user support. The system is currently used by over 1.1 million citizens and offers 77 e-services and 108 types of messages that citizens can receive in their inbox. The most frequently used services are e-civil records, such as birth certificate, certificate of citizenship, marriage certificate, then e-services of the Ministry of the Interior, such as certificate of permanent or temporary residence, or certificate of road vehicle ownership, then e-class register for parents, through which parents can look at their children's grades. Further development of complex services will allow all citizens to resolve a large number of business and life situations completely online. The Office is working on the coordination of electronic services developed by public sector bodies by using state IT infrastructure or its components. In particular, I would like to emphasize the e-business project, which will allow single access to electronic services for business users, and the e-fees project, which will increase the availability of public services through introduction of electronic payment of administrative fees and charges. Our office keeps the central catalog of official documents in Croatia, which allows single and permanent access to documents for all users under equal conditions. A part of the catalog which contains laws and regulations, can be searched through with the Kadil search engine, which is a completely Croatian-made product. It was developed in cooperation with two Croatian faculties, namely the Zagreb Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computing and the Zagreb Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. The Kadil search engine is a unique tool to search through Croatian natural legislation and is fully tailored to the Croatian language. It is also available on the NEGZ portal, which provides a single entry point to the national law databases on individual EU countries. It was the Kadil search engine, as well as our database of regulations, that connected our office and the colleagues from the World Bank. We want the potentials of Kadil in our database to be used for other purposes as well, such as digital services or mapping of administrative procedures, with the help of advanced technologies. Colleagues from the World Bank find our database interesting because it provides a comprehensive and up-to-date overview of the laws and regulations in Croatia. You will hear more about the mapping and the use of advanced technologies for such purposes from the colleagues from the World Bank and the European Commission. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. State Secretary. As far as I know, Mr. Kaspar Richter, you will go ahead. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jan, State Secretary, Elisabetta. Great pleasure to be joining you here today. I want to, first of all, introduce DigiReform to you. DigiReform is providing technical support. Next slide, please. Is providing technical support to member states for designing, developing, and implementing reforms. Now, when we engage with member states on reforms, three issues are really important to us. So first of all, we engage with member states on their request. And this voluntary engagement of member states is important to us because we believe that ownership of the reform is ultimately critical for its success. Secondly, we don't believe in one size fits all, but every single technical support project that we are engaged in is really fit for purpose. It's tailor-made in terms of the expertise that we are drawing on and the way the expertise is rolled out in order to make sure that the needs of the member states are as best addressed as possible. And then thirdly, we have in the current programming period up to 2020, we have an instrument, Structural Reform Support Program. And for the next multi-annual financial framework from 21 to 27, we have the Technical Support Instrument. And through this instrument, we have a budget available that allows us to pay for the expert advice that we provide to member states. So that has two important implications to the member states. First of all, there is no need for any co-financing from the member state side. Well, of course, we are looking for their strong engagement in managing the project. And secondly, also procurement and contractual procedures are done in-house by DG Reform, so member states are relieved of that obligation. Now, with this formula, we have been providing over 1,000 technical support projects in all EU member states in the last 4 years or so. With the technical support instrument, we have an instrument in place to support the member states going forward, recovery and resilience agenda as well. And in this reform effort, of course, the digital transition is absolutely key. And I wanted to give you 2 examples of projects that we've provided in the area of digital economy. Next slide. So first of all, let me take you to the northern part of Belgium, to Flanders. Flanders Investment and Trade is a public agency, the Regional Investment and Trade Promotion Agency. It has 2 priorities. On the one hand, it wants to make sure that entrepreneurs in Flanders can do business abroad. And on the other hand, it wants to attract investment from abroad into Flanders. Now, in order to be competitive as an agency in this very global and fast-moving market, Flanders Investment and Trade has decided that it really needs a framework in order to use artificial intelligence. And in 2018, it turned to DG Reform in order to become a more data-driven organization. We then, with the help of experts, conducted an artificial intelligence maturity assessment of the organization. And then we provided scenarios and recommendations on specific measures that Flanders Investment and Trade could take in order to use artificial intelligence in its day-to-day work. Now, when we did this, we made sure that as part of this work, we consulted closely with the stakeholders in the agency itself, as well as with external stakeholders, the clients of Flanders Investment and Trade. And the result of this engagement was that Flanders Investment and Trade decided to make artificial intelligence adoption a key priority going forward. So that's the example from Belgium. Next slide. Now let me provide you an example on Croatia. A long-standing feature of the business environment in Croatia has been that registering a business is a scattered process involving many agencies and many different technology platforms. When you want to register a business in Croatia, in the past, you've had to visit many different government agencies, often in person, often multiple times, and submit the same document, often multiple times, and in paper. In short, registering a business has been a time-consuming and expensive and unpredictable process. So the Ministry of Economy, Entrepreneurship and Crafts realized that there is a real potential to improve this system, to make it more streamlined, more predictable, more transparent. So they turned to DG Reform, and we partnered up with the World Bank in order to provide a diagnosis of the situation and then to come up with recommendations on how to improve it. And a key finding of this work was that it is possible to modernize the business registry process in Croatia, and it's possible to do it in a phased manner. And then in August 2018, the government enacted a decree on integrating business entry procedures in Croatia. And then November last year, November 2019, the business registration platform START was launched. Next slide. Now, registering a business is only the first step, but when you then engage in business activities such as using premises, hiring staff, investing in equipment, selling products and services, you need additional licenses and ex-ante authorizations. So in a follow-up project, again on the request of the Croatian authorities and in collaboration with the World Bank, this project is still ongoing. We've engaged in a mapping exercise of those licenses and ex-ante authorizations in order then again to come up with recommendations for simplifying and streamlining this process with due consideration of the necessary safeguards for public interest, be it on health, safety, or environment, as well as to look at the potential to automate some of these licenses and ex-ante authorizations and to integrate it into the business registration platform. Now, to end, I want to express my big gratitude to the World Bank for the excellent work and expertise on the project, as well as to the authority, the Ministry of Economy, Entrepreneurship and Growth in partnering with us, and underline also to the Central State Office for Development and Digital Society that DG Reform remains available to further support these reforms in the digital area as well as on other priorities. Thank you. Back to you, Jan.
Yeah, thank you, Kaspar, for the information. I will ask some questions then at the end of the session. Elisabetta, perhaps you go ahead. I will directly go to the next slide, I guess. Yeah, welcome.
Yes, next slide. And thank you so much. And thank you actually to Mr. GRŠIČ and Kaspar, Richter, and to you, the organizer, to give us the opportunity to present this innovative approach that we have been able to implement. So first of all, let me go back to the fact, why is the World Bank wants to support this agenda in Croatia specifically? This is an agenda that we care very much about. We believe that the public administration modernization would not be possible at the speed that is required right now if it doesn't really leapfrog into new technologies. And this conference was excellent for that. On the specific of what we did in Croatia is that we were challenged by this partnership with the Commission and with the authorities, to basically try to implement that very ambitious strategy that was presented to us about digitization, and specifically, to do this faster than we usually would do. So it's not the first time, of course, that we are challenged, to support a client, a government, a stakeholder on the digitalization of public sector administration processes. In this particular case, we were tasked with an objective of reaching and producing a portal for licensing information, which is one of the elements that will be launched at the end of this project that, as Kaspar said, is still ongoing. But we usually takes quite a lot of time, because we have to sift through an enormous amount of laws, bylaws, procedures, and this is performed through standard questionnaires. Back and forth, we have to engage and ask a lot of public sector, public civil servants to go through their own procedure to identify how to then end up in simplifying that. So what the innovation that we think that what we managed to bring through this project was, in fact, to do this by using artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and that allowed us to apply, if you like, to perform the mapping of these administrative requirements, specifically to conducting and starting a business in an automated way. The team developed an algorithm to allow and identify basically more than scan through this body of laws by specific technologies using big data, and ended up identifying in a much faster way that we would have been able to do through standard questionnaire and back and forth with the authorities, that there are more than 9,000 potential regulatory requirements in 37 administrative areas in Croatia for them to start and conduct a business. So clearly this helped us identify or make even more evident what the problem is if you want to accelerate and register a business and attract, of course, business from outside. And we also managed to not only identify what the problem is, but to do this in a much faster way. So this utilization of new artificial intelligence and allowed us to basically do something in a much faster way. So this is the core of the matter. Now, next slide. If you then, if you like, what are also the highlight and of what we have learned from these exercises? One, we immediately could identify that the most serious issue, if you like, that in Croatia exists in two specific sectors, so agriculture and the construction primary sector and the construction sector, so that when the authorities then have to prioritize their action, they can, basically identify where the problem is and where they may want to start by simplification. We also, created a database with enormous difficulties, because one of the problems, of course, is the raw data for undertaking this type of exercises. And this now is a database that is in the hands of the authorities and will allow them to, going forward, identify the problems and what are the simplification requirements that they have. And they will also help them reduce, if you like, red tape and complexity. And we also notice that we also believe that the moment that the portal, the licensing information portal, will be available and published, the businesses will have a much easier way now to access the information that are today required to start and operate the business. So two elements there. One is the fact that the authorities now have identified, if you like, what are the elements, what do they need to do if they want to simplify the process going forward. But immediately, the businesses and the private sector will have, a much easier access through this portal to comply and launch their business activities. They will be able to receive a tailored list of permits, licenses, requirements that are needed. And that's also what's very important, and we heard it earlier on from Mr. GRŠIČ, is that this allows much better transparency, improve, of course, the predictability of the government action, and it's something that is, very much welcome and required in Croatia. So, next slide. Now, this exercise, we were very pleased of the opportunity to bring some level of innovation in through this partnership in Croatia, including because we very much believe that that this learning and what we have learned here, including some of the pinch point and the difficulties along the way, will help us as an institution to bring this innovation in other parts of the world where this, they have similar type of problem, and help also Croatia going forward to maybe to leapfrog and implement that digitalization strategy in a much faster way. So what we have learned is that clearly that, as I said, in addition to transparency and predictability, there is, the use of new technologies have really allowed enormous saving in terms of time and cost, and to reach our objective. The other thing also is that often when you have, Croatia, relatively new, one of the latest entrant into the EU, has an enormous body of regulation and law that it wants to change, as many areas where they want to implement reforms and so on. And there is a sort of excessive demand on the public sector administration for, seeping through the bodies of laws, seeping through their own regulation, so that they have to, for reforms. And often this data collection have to be done manually and so on. So the government stakeholders are just, taxed in terms of time. So how do we help the public sector administration to really perform and implement what, reforms that they want to do? And so this technique allows, further professionalization, if you like, of the public administration and the public sector, so that they don't have to focus on many of the things that are of manual, and they can move on faster into, higher value-added type of activities in the government action. One other important lessons learned that we had here is, of course, the issue of data quality. I'm not saying anything new to this conference. It is, however, another element that I think will come as a learning, that the fact that we had really outdated formats, the data were not consolidated, the body of law, and in some cases, the utilization of artificial intelligence really will be impossible to be utilized unless we spend time and the administration spend on arranging the data, on studying how to do this, the data much better. The good quality of the data is really a prerequisite in some cases and should be tackled at the same time of many of the other modernization processes that are ongoing. Today, we are waiting, of course, for this project to be finished and the portal to be launched, but we also realize that sustainability of this exercise is going to be a challenge, because as we now have sipped through the existing body of laws and regulation, more will be added and more will be become available, and we need to find a way for the administration to really step up their efforts so that this is not a one-off exercise and it will be embraced in procedures, so that in the future, not only the utilization of appropriate technology could be further utilized, but these portals become available and kept up to date. This is also a challenge that is often found. And we have to find a way maybe to update this portal automatically. So there will be more challenges also on for us to find that, to continue to apply these type of technologies. We also believe that the e-government architecture, which was mentioned earlier on by Mr. GRŠIČ, will be needs to be further implemented and updated, and I'm sure the European Commission will also continue to provide support for the acceleration of this strategy. So the comprehensive strategy for digitalization, which we have heard also about from our German speaker earlier on, it's an important precondition, but the implementation of it's extremely tricky when we go into detail and requires a really major effort on several areas. Now, finally, for us as an institution that works in worldwide, I think what we really want to do is to build on what we have learned through this exercise of applying artificial intelligence and want to bring this example to other countries. So thank you again for the opportunity that we were given to do this for Croatia, so that we can spread this knowledge to other countries as well. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta. I have one question. So when I understood it correctly, this project can be used as a blueprint for other countries? Or is it too complex to transfer the data model, or even though there's a question in the chat, if the algorithm is multilingual?
Okay, so this particular, I presume this is for me, right, the question?
Yep.
So this particular exercise was done on the body of law of the Croatia, right? So we had to, it's specific to what we had to do and achieve for Croatia. But what is important is that it's the first time, that it's utilized, and definitely we intend to utilize it in other parts of the world. In fact, it's not necessarily true that, in some developing countries, it might even be easier, because the body of laws and the data, have been started and prepared even more recently than in the case of Croatia, and so might be more attuned to do this type of exercises. So we definitely want to move it beyond Croatia.
Thank you. And there's one question, perhaps to make them shorter. Is the information somehow published available so that the participants can have a deeper look into the technical details?
The portal is not yet published. It is in the hands of the government of Croatia, so it will be the portal itself. But we plan to also separately, as the World Bank, write and discuss about what we are learning together, in cooperation with the Commission, so that it will be available, but not today.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. GRŠIČ, Mr. Kaspar, Mrs. CAPANELLI, for this session. We will now have a 15 minutes break before we then have the closing panel discussion for today. welcome to our last panel session. The last 2 days we heard a lot about government labs, digital labs, living labs, citizen labs, which are all available as open structures for exchange of experience, transfer of knowledge, and participation. They offer a space for the exchange between actors from politics, administration, science, economy, and also civil society. Such innovations are characterized by open forms of participation, interdisciplinary, and variety of methodology approaches. But what are the benefits and what are the objectives? Regina WELSCH from MSG prepared together with her team a round-table paper about innovation management in public administration, which were part of the National eGovernment Competence Center and will have the first impulse in this session. Together with her, we have TSCHAN, eGovernment representatives for the Swiss Confederation. We have Jan-Ole Bayer from the Digital Innovation team. Welcome back. And later on, Moreen HEINE from the Joint Innovation Lab will join us. Regina, perhaps you might start?
Yes. Thank you very much, Jan. Modern technologies have been set up in recent years a lot in public sector. And as you already said, Jan, innovation labs have been set up a lot. So we have heard about many of them also during the last 2 days. And while they all try to foster innovative approaches, they use different methods, they're set up in different contexts, and also they aim for different goals. So we asked ourselves, what makes innovation and innovation management successful in the public sector? In September this year, the German National eGovernment Competence Center held a roundtable on innovation and innovation management in the public sector as a hybrid event in Berlin. And today I'm happy to present the roundtable's outcomes as an introduction to the next and final panel discussion of this event on the role of innovation labs. But why would these outcomes of the roundtable's discussions be interesting in the context of innovation labs? Well, because they're based on a research of around 45 innovation initiatives in the German public sector landscape, and they're clustered by their objectives and applied methods on federal, state, and communal level. What were our findings? We found that innovation is the means to an end. A clearly defined object stands at the beginning of each innovation process. Starting from that, the next step is to select a suitable path for the challenge. Also, for every innovation in public administration, user orientation is one of the most important goals. Also, we found that for change to happen, networks are necessary in order to find solutions together. This happened, for example, in the case of the Digital Hub initiative, when the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy in Germany teamed up with companies and scientific institutions to build a network that connects medium-sized companies with innovation partners from the science and startup scene. The network spread 12 local innovation hubs scattered throughout the country, working cross-disciplinary on digital innovation. Or then the digital learning labs, digitale Lernlabore in the city of Oldenburg, for example. They aim at involving citizens to shape urban development, and for instance, to think about how people want to live together in a sustainable city and in a digitalized world. We also found that public administration employees are often tied to established structures. This hierarchy and process ties shape the understanding of innovation in the public sector. Even small changes in processes, for example, through the digitization of back office workflows, can be perceived as extraordinarily disruptive. So this is our advice to innovation initiatives in order to be successful. Define an objective, form a network, choose a suitable method, be user-oriented, take into account organizational ties in the public sector. Of course, as you all are innovation experts, you all know that there are a lot of other aspects to consider when it comes to innovation in public sector. But maybe we can agree that in particular organizational and legal ties in public sector are challenging for innovation processes. Especially in Germany, Federalism forces decision makers into continuous, long, enduring negotiations in order to agree on solutions. The working format lab or labbing can be a breakthrough method to overcome old-grown competence discussions and political disputes. Recently, someone from a federal ministry in Germany told me the reason he loves the lab working format is because people's old-grown perspectives change. When the discussion is objective, method and solutions-oriented and guided by a good moderator, so he said, people are ready to forget about political difficulties and own interests, but start to find pleasure in working towards solutions. In the lab workshop, so it seems, they are ready to forget the flag of Brandenburg, Bavaria or Schleswig-Holstein, just for the sake of solving problems together. So if labbing works for representatives of the federal, state and communal level in Germany, imagine where it could work as well. If the lab format manages to overcome set and sometimes stuck structures, even if it's just for a 2-hour lab session, I think it is a big win, a good starting point for change in the way public sector works. The lab format also could work in EU policy-making processes, for example. So would it be possible to lay aside the flag of Germany, Latvia, Spain or Malta or any other EU member state for the length of a lab session in order to solve pressing European problems? And then maybe it could even be possible to sometimes forget we are Europe, we are the US, China or Russia, and just for as long as a lab session lasts, forget we have difficulties or protect our interests or that we want to make a point, but just solve pressing global problems together, of which, as we all know, we have enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Regina, for the first impulse. Dieter, you have now gained insights of the work of innovation labs and also about innovation about the last 2 days. What role do innovations and innovation labs play in Switzerland?
Well, Jan, first of all, let me say there are some who might say innovation and federal administration is a contradiction by itself, but I don't agree. Obviously, we've seen the past 2 days, yesterday and today, that there's so much going on in all of these countries, and not only on the country level, but also on in Switzerland, we call it the cantonal level, the Bundesländer, as you say in Germany, and the lowest level, the municipalities. So the first finding from our Swiss perspective is indeed that innovation can happen in many different forms and ways and in different places, not only in innovation labs, in citizen labs. These are important to try out things, to really say, that's the goal today, we want to see how we can do it, but it's not the only source. I think that's important to realize. And this brings me to the second point. It is often said that a federal structure with many cantons and even more municipalities, as you might recall, we have still 26 cantons in Switzerland and around 2,000 municipalities for a rather small country. This is a bad thing for digital transformation and for e-government. But again, I do not agree with this. On the contrary, I think that municipalities, cantons also, they can serve as test labs. They can be an extreme good source of innovation, trying out things in a so-called small lab environment. And if it doesn't work, if you fail, the damage isn't that huge. The world will go on, as we say. It's not that the world will come to an end if a small municipality is trying out something and it didn't work. And the third point that we see, I think, in innovation often comes from those who are really in close contact with the clients, with the customers. And in our e-government model, we have the 3 groups that we have heard from Croatia as well, and I think from Max Osterheld, he said the same with the 3 levels of administration. We also have 3 levels or 3 different groups of clients. We say first it's the citizens, the people living in the country, and those are traditionally through the municipalities addressed. They do not come to the federal governments for needs. An direct interaction between the federal government and the citizens, that's the exception. And usually they go to to their municipalities where they even know the people working there at the counter and say they can help me, whatever my needs are, they will help me and tell me what to do and where to go. The second group, obviously, economy and the companies. The third group, administration on all other horizontal and vertical levels, where we say there it's important to share the data that we have, to work together to create workflows, to not stop a process at the end of an organizational unit and then restart it from scratch at the next one, but say, what do the clients want from A to Z and how we can support this and design the processes through from A to Z, and not say it stops here and then it restarts here again. So innovation also comes when trying to fully apply the 6 principles from the Tallinn Declaration. As you might recall, Switzerland also signed in 2017, along with many other EU and EFTA countries, the Tallinn Declaration on e-government with its 6 principles. And there again, this especially digital by default, once only, and interoperability. If we take a look at it, what does it mean on day-to-day work? What does it mean on a daily basis? And it brings a lot of innovation. And as Regina said just a couple of minutes ago, innovation can be very small things, not reinventing the wheel completely, but maybe just adjusting the pressure a little bit, if we stay with this example.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Perhaps as we heard a lot of these examples from other countries, perhaps you can share 1 or 2 innovative examples from Switzerland.
Yeah, so talking about innovation labs, one speciality, so to say, in Switzerland is that we often do things, not the government does it on its own, but what we call the PPP principle, the public-private partnership. So we develop things together. The government creates the legal framework, and then we work with the companies to actually create solutions. Our electronic identity has been established this way, where we involved the banks, insurance companies, the post service, because we are convinced that we will finally achieve a better solution and get to the people, to the clients faster with the involvement of these private or semi-private companies where the government is sometimes a major shareholder. That is one case. Then innovation labs. I just did the test on my own in this morning. When you Google innovation labs in Switzerland, the first 5 or 6 hits are from private companies, and then a bit later, one we mentioned what is called the Staatslabor, which is an initiative that is also interesting, but a lot of innovation regarding e-government or digital transformation is indeed done by private companies, by the corporate world, also by the education world, university, and then we try to talk together and say, what are your findings? How can this help us? What are our questions? Did you ask the same questions? Can we learn from your insights? And I think that's an important place. To give you a couple other examples, one success story, so to say, that is really showing the bottom-up approach of innovation is e-Umzug, the electronic movement. So when you move from one place to the other, in the first place, you say, I'm not living here anymore. You register, you unregister there, and then you move to the next village, and there you register again. You can do it fully all electronically these days. That's an initiative that first started, if I'm not mistaken, by the town of Zurich, so on a municipality level. And then it grew and was made available for Canton, for Canton solution, then for others, and now we want to make it available all over Switzerland. And I think that's also a great example of innovation that starts small in a small area, and once we see it's a good solution, it's working, we must have the courage to scale it up, to multiply these solutions. And in Switzerland, we have, with the municipalities, with the cantons, we have so many good ideas, so many good solutions. Maybe there we should dare more to copy these things. I mean, that's a bit contrary to our mentality. You remember in school, Jan, we were told for 15 years that don't spy, don't look left or right. And that's probably wrong these days. We should exactly do this. We should spy on our neighbors. We should look left or right. We should look to what our neighboring countries are doing, and not waste your time and your brain energy by reinventing things that others have already done.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So that's why cooperation is also a big thing what we have to do in this case. Thank you, Dieter. I guess you have to leave now because you need to get your flight back to Switzerland.
Yeah, exactly.
It works in this way. Thank you
Rushing
for being
back
here.
to the airport. Thanks so much for being here.
And hopefully we see you again next year.
Hope the same. Thanks so much.
Regina, as you are working for a public sector consulting company, in which cases are you working together with innovation labs, and how do you decide to do so? And finally, what do you expect then from the results?
This is a pretty wide, broad, complex question, but yes, we use elements or the innovation lab itself, or elements from this method, innovation lab, a lot within projects in the public sector. We, in fact, launch our own innovation lab at the moment, have a special location for that. And also we work with other innovation labs, for example, with a joint innovation lab currently on a project. From my experience, the lab method can be, of course, used for us, the classical objective to develop a tool, for example, an electronic tool. There you visualize processes, then you develop a mock-up, but also for different purposes. For example, when a federal ministry faces the challenge of a large-scale measure and doesn't know what to do at the first point, so the measure needs to be broken down into workable pieces. The lab can be some sort of a structured brainstorming that then at the end puts out a very, sometimes even scalable, but for sure a clearly defined, for example, strategy or a more clearly defined objective.
Okay, thank you. Jan Ole, you showed that yesterday how the digital innovation team is working within the organization. The question is, how do you decide whether the project you are requested for to do, is it an innovative project? Is it something for you and your team, or is it something more straight-lined topic?
Yeah, I think the first question is how do we define innovation itself? And I think there are a lot of definitions out there for us as a project team, and as a kind of criteria how we decide which projects we are working on, which not. For us, innovation is everything that's new and, let's say, innovative for the specific client we are talking about. I think that's the very important part, as Regina and Thomas mentioned. It's not always about the, blockchain and AI-based chatbot something, but it's especially in public administration often about easy things, quite normal things in other environments like messengers or even an electronic record management system or something like that. So the question is always, what is new for the client we are talking with, for the agency we're talking with? And of course, there are some criteria we use for the decision. I think that the first and most important one is the agency we are talking with. Are they open enough? Are they really interested, and do they feel a real desire to change, to learn new approaches, to learn how they could deal with problems, find solutions and things like that? Because our focus is not only to find the solutions, but to teach the agencies how they could manage and work with these new methods and approaches later for themselves. So that is, I think, the most important criteria. Another thing is, are they really open enough to start with the problem and not the solution? Because in very many cases, we think we already know what the solution is for the citizen, for the colleague in another agency or things like that, persons like that. But that's not how things like design thinking works. We all know we have to start and to look at the problem in the first case, and to use things like user research to really understand what possible solutions, ideas for solutions could be. And I think there are a lot of agencies who have to learn that before they could really do such kind of projects. Third thing, of course, we are called a digital innovation team, so criteria might be there should at least be a small possibility that the solution for the problem is a digital one. And last but not least, it should be, because we are still in level as project group, an experimental phase in a way, it should be small enough. It shouldn't be a real huge project which needs, I don't know, years and a lot of discussions, a lot of stakeholders involved, but it should be small enough for us to deal with.
Thank you, Jan. Moreen, welcome to the stage. How do you see the focus of the innovation labs and the focus of the work? What should we do as innovation labs, and what is the daily business?
What is also important from my point of view is the awareness that innovation labs must not be organized or organizational units that should carry out standard digitization projects. We need to focus on concrete problems. That's what Jan Ole mentioned, and innovative solutions to these problems. That's important. And when requests come in, the question is always, does this fit in my lab or does it not? And so in Germany, we may have the particular problem that there are currently not enough specialists for the digital transformation in the public sector. And innovation labs could then be involved in projects that are actually not very challenging, at least in terms of the degree of innovation. And on the other hand, we notice that civil servants have often little knowledge of innovation labs or do not quite like to share their concrete problems. This is important, however, in order to work on innovative solutions in a less technology-oriented, but more problem-oriented way. And I think there's also great pressure on the innovation labs to succeed. That's a problem too, because they are often promoted at a rather high level, even a political level. And this can also lead to a situation where high-risk projects tend to be rejected. So we really have to be aware of the projects we want to conduct in innovation labs and projects we don't want to conduct. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Moreen. What we discussed also during the last 2 days here in Lübeck is a little bit about the interdisciplinarity of the teams and how the composition of teams should be. So also from different areas like administration, science, economy. Jan, now your team is directly connected to your department. How do you see these different areas, and how would you work with them together?
Well, personally, I think regarding interdisciplinarity, this can really not be overestimated in any case. It's so important that I'm really convinced, to say it clear, you won't find the best possible solution with, let's say, a group of, I don't know, middle-aged, middle-class white male lawyers or computer scientists. So you need different people. You need people of different social backgrounds, things like that, and that's the second part. It's not only about interdisciplinarity of, let's say, professions and things like that. It's a question of diversity, I think. You need people with other genders, you need people with other cultural backgrounds, other experiences in life, and so with other things, with other view of things and different approaches to look at problems. So I think it's really important on the one hand to have these internally teams as diverse and interdisciplinary as possible. And of course, you have to get better with the exchange between, as you said, between administration, science, and economy. Where are in the government the people from startups? Where are the designers? Where are the ethnographers? And why don't we work more together with these kind of people from, let's say, academia, from companies and things like that? I think it's really important to have internally the teams diverse, as I said, but also on the more general level to foster working together between these areas.
Yeah, the diversity of teams is also, from my point of view, very important. And Moreen, you just mentioned that mistakes and failure should be allowed. So there's a question, more or less, how can we encourage employees at all levels that they are more open to innovation and also know that they can make mistakes, that it's normal in the innovation process. Perhaps Jan, you can start, and then Moreen, you can perhaps add some more information about it.
Yes. First of all, whom are we talking about? Who is he? That's the first question. If we look at the management level, especially at the persons sitting, the decision makers, the answer is quite easy. Be a role model, be a good example for yourself. And I think our new, not so new anymore, CIO, Markus Richter, is a good example for that, because he really lives what he preaches. He is openly minded. He talks to people. He works to bring people together and to find pragmatic solutions for things. So I think that's part. And I know him as a man where you can always come up to and speak about mistakes and finding solutions to solve or to make it better after that. I think that's the first point. On a more general level, as I said, diversity is the key, and having people from diverse with diverse points of view. On an organizational level, of course, you have to, let's say, create an open atmosphere. Start small. Don't want to change everything, but start with small exchange. Use like methods and approaches like retrospectives from Scrum and things like that to get used in your daily life, in your daily work life, to find better ways to discover risks, to discover mistakes early, to deal with them after you've made them, things like that. So in the end, it's really easy to allow mistakes. You and your organization just have to allow mistakes.
Yeah. I only can underline that message, and I think innovation needs to be anchored in the entire organization. That's really important, and labs in turn can help to ensure that the methods and the ways of thinking that are used in labs or within the whole organization with regard to innovation processes are not too standardized. So I think bold ideas need often more than a well-planned innovation process and very established toolboxes and methods and so on. So we need to stay open for new approaches too.
Regina, and how is your work if you come as a public sector consultant to the teams, to the employees? How do they react on innovative projects and or innovative approaches, and how do you deal with it?
From my experience, the interesting thing is that from my experience, I know that in public administration there are a lot of very highly qualified and highly motivated people. You can find a lot of them. And I think it's still difficult. I think it's the administrative apparatus, this administrative machine that hinders them to pursue continuously innovative approaches, or oftentimes. If you are well educated, if you are motivated and you're full of energy and you constantly try to change things within your institution, but your boss doesn't have your back and the institution doesn't want you to continue and you're afraid to fail, then at some point it gets frustrating, I guess, and no matter how motivated you are, you'd stop doing it.
Thank you. Moreen, do you have something to add around the way how we can...
I think we should talk about openness. One important point to increase the problem-solving capability of the labs and also to ensure scalability is that labs must be open for the different partners. I think that's very important. In other words, open for administrations, open for science, open also for companies. And it shouldn't be a closed shop. So we have to tell our stories every time, again and again, until it reaches everyone.
So you meant that you are also building now an innovation lab. Is this open also for other parties?
Yes, yes, it is supposed to open also for other parties. We are launching it right now. Also, I forgot to answer the part of your second question, how we deal with it.
Yeah,
was an interesting question too, as consultants within an institution. I think what's very important if you have a lot of motivated people on board to talk to the political levels of the institution. Only if there is a clear political will that you actually deal with innovation in a true sense and not just for the sake of innovation, since innovation is not the aim itself but the means. So I think it's important to get all also within the institution, of course outside, also depending on the project and the issue, but within the institution, the higher levels on board. I think then the project or the innovation approach has better chances of succeeding.
Jan, you meant yesterday your stage 2, so that you will now start to work with other institutes and startups. What is your plan to work with other labs? Are you there also open, let's say like this?
Yeah, sure. As I said, and as I mentioned, and as Regina said, it's definitely absolutely necessary to be open to use the mindsets and the input and the experiences other ones made before. So yes, we definitely do that, and I think it's really important, as I said before, to bring like this startup mindset in government, this other ways to deal with problems, this thinking faster, being faster, doing faster, fail faster attitude. That's so important to see. And of course, as you mentioned, science, of course, yes, we need your experiences too from academia. Absolutely.
Thank you. Moreen, Regina, or Jan, you would like to add something at the end? Perhaps a short round?
Yeah. I think that the point of diversity is actually very important, and this ensures that many perspectives are taken into account during the projects, and especially conflicts are addressed at a very early stage. When we leave out diversity, this means that conflicts pop up in a very late stage of a project, and that's too late.
Jan Ole, perhaps a final statement.
A final word. Well, just do it. That's the most easiest sentence and often difficult to do. But just do it. Just start it. And as Regina mentioned, I think that was very important. Don't do innovation for innovation's sake. You could do that, but it won't be sustainable. So a colleague of mine always tells it in German, Innovationstheater, so kind of innovation spectacle. Just doing innovation because of doing innovation and just building up a lab with all this cool stuff from Vitra and Lego and things like that, just because it looks cool and because it's great for photographies. Don't do that. Do innovation because you want to change your government, the way your administration, your organization works. And there are so many chances and so many possibilities to do better, more citizen-oriented service. Then, yeah, just do it.
Thank you, Jan. Regina, perhaps?
I have nothing to add to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, then I would like to say thank you to Jan Ole, who's on screen from Berlin. Thank you very much to Regina.
Unfortunately, only, yes.
Yeah, very much. Thank you to you for the impulse and the research, and also thank you, Moreen, for your impressions. Christian, perhaps you might come back to the stage.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I think the virus has brought a lot of pain, dislocation, and worry to millions of people in Europe and around the world. But we have one thing that no one ever had before in a pandemic. We have digital ways to fill the gaps that physical distances leaves. We have been able to go on studying and working, shopping and seeing friends, and of course discussing policy and strategies in conferences like this. All because of technology that didn't even exist a couple of decades ago. All streams of today and yesterday you will find by beginning of next week on our YouTube channel. Just follow us on Twitter and we will inform you. By the end of this week or also by beginning of next week, you can also have all PowerPoints as PDF as download from the website when the speakers agree. And yeah, dear participants, feel hushed, sleep well. It was a long day. Stay healthy, and I hope I see you back next year, same days, same time, same stage. And I want to thank all my colleagues here as moderator from the Joint eGovernment Innovation Lab. I wanted to thank the German EU Presidency, the Federal Ministry of the Interior, the state government of Schleswig-Holstein, and especially the team of SG Medientechnik who supported us here, and also for the Slowdown Conference Hotel here in Lübeck-Travemünde for the possibility to have this broadcasting here in this beautiful hotel. Thank you very much and good night.
In the second half of 2020, Germany will assume the presidency of the Council of the European Union. The consequences of the coronavirus pandemic present Europe with an enormous challenge. Together, we want to work for Europe's recovery. How do we achieve this? By ensuring that Europe emerges from the crisis with greater solidarity and cohesion within, and more capable and sovereign abroad. We want to be even more united in all our diversity. What issues will be important in the future? We want to advance the European Union on strategically important issues like climate change, security, refugees and migration, the rule of law, and the digital transformation. We want to become even more innovative and sustainable in order to better overcome future challenges. The Presidency's cultural program is forward-looking. At its heart is the artwork Earth Speaker by Olafur Eliasson, in which Europe's children call on political leaders to listen. Based on our common values, we are committed to acting as a driving force and facilitator for a strong and capable Europe in the world.